Well, friends, this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're watching this podcast, we're going to be talking to 4SA's head of legal, who is Liesl Pretorius. Liesl, it's really great to be chatting to you. 4SA is our Friends Freedom of Religion South Africa, a lobby group, which works to protect and promote your right to religious freedom in South Africa. And Liesl, we've spoken before. The topic that we're talking about today is quite relevant. It's been in discussion amongst my friend groups. I've no doubt that there's a number of people that will be looking forward to hearing an update on this. We're going to be talking about the marriage bill and also discussing 4SA's up and coming victory series, which looks back at how you guys have been standing faithful for faith and freedom over the past 10 years. And I'm very glad to be partnering with you, even today, as you guys give us some insight in terms of what's happening in the rolling discussion between the church and the state. So let's kick it off with a question. Give us a little bit of background regarding a recap on the marriage bill.
So, the marriage bill, it's this new law before Parliament. A bill is a draft law. If somebody was wondering about that terminology, what are we talking about? And the purpose of this new marriage bill is to consolidate, to simplify our very fragmented marriage system in South Africa. In South Africa, we have no less than three marriage laws. We have the Marriage Act, for heterosexual monogamous marriages. We have the Civil Union Act that can be used for civil unions between heterosexual and same-sex couples. And then we have the Customary Marriages Act for more traditional African marriages, and also makes room for polygamous marriages between one man and more than one wife. So we had these three marriage acts. And then the Department of Home Affairs, which is the custodian of marriage laws in South Africa, they started this extensive public participation process about how should marriage law be reformed, because there are certain issues, and we'll get to it in a while. And we participated in that process as well, and they produced this white paper, and a white paper basically sets the official government policy for a particular sector. And from that white paper, they created a draft bill, which is a bill that's before about government department, and we also commented on that. And then eventually a bill was introduced in Parliament, and that's what we have now. In December of 2023, the marriage bill was introduced in Parliament. It's currently before the Portfolio Committee of Home Affairs, which is a committee of the National Assembly, the first house. They've invited written comments, which we have submitted, and now they're busy with public hearings, which is an opportunity to give oral comments on the bill. They started in Gauteng, and they will continue these public hearings through next year, because it's very important to hear the public's voice in the lawmaking process. That is grassroots democracy in action.
I think the reason why I knew that there were public hearings going on is a number of my friends intended on going and making representation. There was hearings in Hammanskraal and Ekurhuleni on Monday and Tuesday this week. So I've kind of got this in my head at the moment. Maybe tell us, you already mentioned a couple of concerns, but give us the lowdown in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly of this particular bill.
All right, so let me just say something about our position. 4SA is faith neutral. So that means we don't promote any particular faith. We protect the right to religious freedom broadly of all South Africans. But obviously, in terms of that, that protects the right to freedom of religion of particular faiths as well. And we're also politically neutral, so we don't follow any, political agenda or ideology. And so from that perspective, we think it's a very good bill. We think it is balanced, and we think it is reasonable. Why do we think it's a good bill? Well, firstly, in terms of legislation, there are religious marriages, and we're thinking specifically about, or predominantly about Muslim and Hindu marriages that are not recognized by law because it's performed in terms of religion. The problem with this is the moment one of the spouses, the marriage dissolves, either because of death or divorce, the surviving or the divorced spouse is left very vulnerable, as well as any children that issued from that marriage. So that is a big concern. So the good thing is that these religious marriages will be recognized subject to minimal requirements that are very reasonable, age and consent and witnesses, things like that, so that there's a valid marriage and people can actually consent and nobody's being forced into it or scammed. And what is fantastic about this bill is also that there is a continued express protection of religious marriage officers. So this means a pastor, a rabbi, a dominee, any religious marriage officer cannot be forced to solemnize any marriage that goes against their faith and the faith of the organization, the doctrines, the tenets of belief that that organization belongs to. That's very important. We do have that in terms of our current Marriage Act. But the bill that was before the department did not have that in. And then we queried the department about that. And they said, well, it's implied that that protection continues. And we said, no, you have to put that very explicitly. Because if something was there and it isn't there, it can create the impression that it shouldn't be there. And an express protection in law is just better. So that is now in the new marriage bill. And that's fantastic. What the bill also does is, which is good from a constitutional and neutral perspective, is that it opens the categories of who can become marriage officers. So not only religious marriage officers, basically anybody who holds a responsible position in any cultural or secular or traditional, maybe a traditional tribal organization, a Khoisan council, something like that. They can become a marriage officer. So this means every group can have somebody who officiates over marriages or unions in terms of what they believe. The positive thing about this from a freedom of religion perspective is then nobody can actually say, well, there's nobody to cater for me, so other people have to be forced to solemnize my marriage. In that way, each organization is protected. Because they can legitimately say, but there should be somebody else who can solemnize your union. We only solemnize unions that are in line with our views of what a marriage is.
Yes.
So that's good. But then there's also the bad. Unfortunately, there's no conscientious protection of civil marriage officers. So this is a person who's employed by the Department of Home Affairs, a magistrate, or other people who are marriage officers due to an employment position that they hold. Unfortunately, they don't have that conscientious protection at the moment. They used to have it, and then the Civil Union Act was amended. So that's problematic. And then also we are looking at the possibility that religious leaders who are not marriage officers, designated marriage officers, may inadvertently be criminalized. So what do I mean by that? That's a situation where, for example,
my heart nearly stopped.
Like, what is this?
Please explain.
This is yeah, please explain. This is the situation, or maybe I should just say, we don't think that it is the intention to criminalize these leaders. But it's in the wording of the text of the bill creates a gap. So we can just tighten the wording to sort it out. So this is a situation, for example, say you're Christian and you go to a church and you have a pastor there and you want this pastor to solemnize, to officiate your marriage ceremony. But this pastor isn't a designated marriage officer. So they can do the sermon, but they can't ask the legal questions. They can't, stand there and have you fill in the register and sign. So what you then do is you have your pastor who gives the sermon, and then you might have another pastor from that organization or another person who in some way who is an actual designated marriage officer. And they just ask legal questions. They ensure that the register is filled in and everything is sent off to Home Affairs. Or you could just have the legal part done at Home Affairs before an official. That's that scenario. So we just want the wording tightened up so that this poor pastor is only doing the sermon. He's not pretending to be a marriage officer. The couple knows he's not a marriage officer. They're into a legal marriage officer, that there isn't some confusion that this person is criminalized. And then I just want to say lastly that we, like I said, our mandate is neutral. That persons of faith communities might have broader concerns that we do, especially around the definition of marriage. And that's why we have a public engagement process in our democratic system. And we encourage all persons of faith who have additional concerns to make use of the opportunity to participate in the public hearings, so to also have their say in the lawmaking process.
And Liesl, I think just at this moment, I've got to say, as a pastor in a conservative evangelical Christian church, that I would definitely encourage my friends that are out there to get involved in the public hearings. because what marriage is as an institution has been put in effect by God in terms of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. And so what marriage means is important to us. And so if we have the opportunity to speak toward the definition, a clear definition of marriage from a Christian perspective, I think we ought to do that. At the same time, I am happy with the work that you guys have done as 4SA in order to ensure that the rights of religious freedom have been upheld in South Africa. I'm very grateful for the work that you've done. I've been tracking this all the way through, and I can remember when we were sweating bullets because it really looked bad. The language was terrible. The remaining issues that you've identified, the poor guy that isn't a marriage officer who's solemnizing a marriage but isn't doing the legal side of the marriage, and some other things which you've identified. Maybe you want to just give the listeners some indication of how you as 4SA plan to address those problematic aspects of the marriage bill.
Yes, certainly, Mark. And I just want to also concur and encourage everyone, as you did, to participate. You know, this is what 4SA does. We have a very narrow mandate, but as I always say, everybody has their place on the wall. Our place is the broad protection, but that broad protection gives you the right to enjoy your religious freedom and to stand there and to give your views based on your sincerely held beliefs. Absolutely. So what are we doing to address these few problematic aspects of the marriage bill? Well, we have sent written and oral written submissions to Parliament, and we also intend to do oral submissions. The parliamentary public hearings will be next year, as well as the ones in the Western Cape, and we're based in the Western Cape, so we will attend those. Concerning the civil marriage officers, to protect their right to religious freedom, because we don't leave our right to religious freedom at the house. We check it at the front door when we go to work in the morning. I mean, our democracy should be better than that. Our constitution, has higher hopes than that.
Yes.
So the department's own white paper has a very creative solution. They say, distinguish between solemnization, which is ceremonial and which often has religious connotations and aspects, from the administrative legal part. So if a civil marriage officer, if all that they do is they register a marriage in the same way that they register a birth or a death, it's an administrative legal function. You're not part of some sort of ceremony. So that, to a very large extent, can address religious freedom concerns. Because we understand we are in a constitutional democracy. The state everybody is equal before the law. The state cannot unfairly discriminate against anybody. They have to provide marriage services on an equal basis to all South Africans who are allowed to have marriages in terms of our legislation. So that's the one thing. And then as to the poor religious leader who might face inadvertent criminalization, we're just basically saying, look, guys, we don't think that it was your intention to criminalize them. Just tighten up the language so that there isn't some loophole and, some poor guy has to be the test case that in the end wins, but goes through that whole terrible process.
Yeah. I mean, excellent. I can see the logic of the two solutions that you put in front. That makes perfect sense. On the one hand, I absolutely want to affirm what you've said in terms of we want broad public participation. So never mind where you sit on the religious spectrum, you have a democratic obligation as a good citizen to be involved in the democratic process. And these public hearings are part of that democratic process. I do want to, speak to my particular audience for a moment and say, friends, if you kind of hold to one man and one woman for life, this is your opportunity to stand in a public space and make that call. Now, that goes beyond, I think, maybe the 4SA mandate, but it certainly does sit in the mandate of maybe myself as a pastor and a number of the people that would be hearing this podcast, that these public hearings are particularly geared for people like us to have our say. How does that work? I mean, where are the rest of the public hearings happening? How can members of the public have their say on this marriage bill?
Well, Mark, I think the important thing is to educate yourself on the issues and to raise awareness. We have a lot of resources on our website, obviously focusing from our mandate, but we've got the bill documents uploaded. We recently published a marriage bill article. It's on our articles section on our website. So there you can start to orientate yourself, and then you can look what your additional issues are from your particular theological point of view, which you absolutely have the right to stand there and to also share. Um, so what the committee has started with is the provincial public hearings on Monday and Tuesday. They had the Gauteng public hearings. And then from next year, 2025, they will do the rest of the provinces, starting, I believe, speaking under correction, in KwaZulu-Natal, because those dates and venues have not yet been confirmed. But what people can do if they subscribe to our newsletter, if they watch our website, obviously we put some updates up there as we become aware of new confirmed hearings. They'll also have the parliamentary hearings next year, and we will participate in those. But yes, as I said, follow us on follow our news alerts by subscribing to our newsletter. Follow us on social media, and that way you'll be aware of these issues and other issues that affect faith and freedom in South Africa.
So, Liesl, I've been interacting with your team for many years now, first on Radio Pulpit and now just on the podcast. I really cheer for SA from the sidelines, but it's because I can see what you guys do. You guys do an incredible job in terms of representing religious freedom in the South African landscape. And so even as I celebrate you often as you guys work toward that goal, you are coming up for an important milestone. 10 years is a big deal. You guys have been faithfully bearing the standard for 10 years. I have no idea. I have no idea. I understand that you've got a series coming out where you're going to be looking back at the past 10 years and really celebrating the victories that you guys have won for religious freedom. What can people expect from the series? How can people access the series? How's that going to work?
Yes, we're very grateful, I must say, and it's a privilege to do our work. And we do see it as a calling, and we do see it as, we look back with thankfulness and gratitude because it's something that you know that you can't do it in your own strength.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done. So we have this highlight series looking back over this past decade. We highlighted 15 victories. I believe there are more, but we chose to highlight 15, and we are releasing the videos, one video each week. So we've already released 3 videos, and we post them on our social media, on our Facebook page. They're on our YouTube. We have a victories playlist, and each week we are sending out a newsletter on Friday, just highlighting one victory. And just to quickly mention a few, they focus on, how we stop the misuse of a spiritual abuse definition in domestic in Domestic Violence Act, which could have stopped pastors just giving counseling and praying, now suddenly they might be facing criminal charges while they're not doing anything, that's violating anybody's human right, because of broad definitions are very problematic. Let me tell you that as an attorney, especially in criminal laws. We look at how we defeated lockdown discrimination. You might recall, when casinos and gyms were allowed to be open, but you're not allowed to go to church. And we said, listen, guys, we understand you need safety precautions, but just, the same under the safety precautions, let people go to church.
Yes.
We looked at the Equality Act that had also, again, broad definitions, that if those definitions remain the same, might spell a disaster for churches, especially when you're thinking about church leadership and membership and certain roles that churches say you have to have certain qualifications to be in that role. Based on their theological views. This week, we're releasing a video on how we defended a guy called Simeon Chetty, who converted to Christianity, and he gave his testimony, and the religious group that he belonged to, some members of an organization wanted to sue him even for hate speech, for giving his testimony, and we defended his free speech rights, and by that, also actually the free speech right of that religious group, religious background, to be able to share their faith publicly. We look at the work that we do around education, parental rights in education, very important from a freedom of religion perspective. as a parent to raise your children according to your own faith, your own moral values. So we looked at how we fought in ideological indoctrination in schools, and that's ongoing. How we fought to keep religion in public schools, and church access to school venues. Many churches meet in school halls, and yes, and many other things. The spy bill that had threats to religious freedom. Protecting churches from censorship, protecting church autonomy from, the state or any other person outside interfering in their internal affairs, especially those affairs that are governed according to the theological doctrines of a church. So many of those things. And we are grateful that we could do it. And we hope to keep on standing for faith and freedom for another 10 years.
Well, Liesl, really, strength to your arm. Thank you for the good work that you do, and for others in the organization. I do hope that Michael enjoys his time off as he recoups and recovers and re-energizes and revigorates and finds new vision, and that God continues to bless you as an organization. Even as you go out, let me just remind any listeners that have made it to this point that you can find out more about freedom of religion by going to their website, www.forsa, that's forsa.org.za, and there you can find a large amount of videos, articles. You can sign up to a newsletter that'll keep you updated. You can also find them on the socials, YouTube and Facebook, where they post information from time to time. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I hope that you have a good December.
Thank you, Mark. You too.